Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching Today I Found Out, and in the video today we're answering the question of why are bull and bear markets called that? Just before we get started, I will say that this video is brought to you by TunnelBear. If you like bears and if you like tunnels, well, you're going to love TunnelBear. Seriously, TunnelBear is a VPN that gives you internet privacy and freedom. Go to tunnelbear.com/brainfood, link in the description below, for a free trial, no credit card required. For those who don't know, a bear market, or where someone is being bearish in this context, is marked by investors being conservative and pessimistic, resulting in a declining market, generally marked by the mass selling off of stock. A bull market is simply the opposite of that, with investors being aggressive and positive, with stock prices rising as a result of this optimism. This bull and bear terminology first popped up in the 18th century in England. There are a couple of different possible sources for the bear part of this tandem, but the leading theory is that it derived from an old 16th century proverb, selling the bear's skin before one has caught the bear, or alternatively, don't sell the bear skin before you've killed him, which is equivalent to don't count your eggs before they've hatched. By the early 18th century, when people in the stock world would sell something they didn't yet own, in hopes of turning a profit by eventually being able to buy the thing at a cheaper rate than they sold it before delivery was due, this gave rise to the saying that they sold the bearskin, and the people themselves were called bearskin jobbers. One of the earliest references of this comes from an issue of the Tatler from April 26, 1709. For as much as it is very hard to keep land in repair without ready cash, I do, out of my personal estate, bestow the bearskin, which I have frequently lent to several societies about this town to supply their necessities. I say I give also the said bearskin as immediate fund to the said citizens forever. In a later edition, June 23rd of 1709, it goes on to explain, I fear the word bear is hardly to be understood among the polite people, but I take the meaning to be that one who ensures a real value upon an imaginary thing is said to sell a bear, and is the same thing as a promise among courtiers or a vow between lovers. Yet another early instance of the term is in Daniel Defoe's The Anatomy of Change Alley, published in 1719, around the time the term was popularized to something of the same type of the definition we use today. Those who buy exchange alley bargains are styled buyers of bearskins. The use of the word bear in this way was popularized thanks to one of the early market bubbles, which was known as the South Sea Bubble. While it was a long and incredibly complex market scheme that led to the bubble, the gist of it was that the South Sea Company, formed in 1711, was granted by Britain a monopoly on all trade to South America and would be given an annual sum, 6% interest plus expenses, from the government. In exchange, the new company agreed to take over large portions of the government's debt. In fact, this was primarily how the company actually made money throughout its century and a half it was in business, simply by dealing in government debt. Thanks to this deal and an amazing amount of government corruption, insider trading, and other unscrupulous practices by certain shareholders who knew well that the company's trade business had little hope of ever being profitable, the burgeoning company's stock absolutely soared. At its peak, based on its stock price, the company was worth about £200 million. By purchasing power, today this would be about £24 billion or $37 billion, but by average earnings, it would be £350 billion or $537 billion. Besides the fact that they didn't even have their first trading shipment until 1717, 6 years after the trading company first formed, one of the problems was that having an exclusive monopoly on trading to South America from the British government at the time wasn't saying much, as most of the region was entirely held by Spain, who Britain they were at war with. Nevertheless, amid rampant and widely published rumors of the vast wealth from gold and other resources in those regions and the potential promise of soon securing trade rights from Spain, the stock prices soared, even though the company wasn't really doing any actual trading, and their main asset, the monopoly on trade with Middle and South America, was essentially worthless, as the core stockholders well knew. Spain did eventually grant the South Sea Company rights to trade in the regions held by Spain, but only one shipload per year total was allowed in exchange for a small percentage of the profits. Needless to say, the inability to do any actual real volume of trading, and the fact that war once again broke out in 1718 between Spain and Britain, causing much of the company's scant physical assets to be seized by Spain, well, it caused a market crash that was not pretty. So as to the bull name for rising markets, in this case we have to do a little more speculation, as the documented evidence just isn't there. The leading theory is that it came about as a direct result of the term bear. Specifically, the first known instance of the market term bull popped up in 1714, shortly after the term bear appeared. At the time, it was something of a common practice to bear and bull bait. With bear baiting, they'd essentially chain a bear or bears up in an area and then set some other animals to attack the bears, usually dogs, as a form of entertainment for spectators seated in the area. Lovely. While bears were one of the more popular animals to use in these games, bulls were also commonly used. More rarely, other animals were used, such as in one instance when an ape was tied to a pony's back and then dogs were set on them. According to one spectator, the spectacle of the dogs tearing the pony to shreds while the ape screamed and desperately tried to stay on the pony's back out of reach of the snapping jaws of the dogs was, to quote, very laughable. In any event, the popularity of bear and bull baiting, along with perhaps the association with bulls charging, is thought to have probably been why bull was chosen as something of an antithesis of a bear shortly after bear first popped up in the stock sense. But of course, we can't be 100% sure on this one, as there wasn't the more lengthily documented progression as there was for the bear term. And now for a bonus fact. A common myth often put forward as to the origin of bull and bear market terminology is that it comes from the last names of two prominent banking businesses, the Bull Teals and the Barings. The former supposedly being aggressive in their investments and the latter being more conservative. While both the Barings and the Bull Teal Bank did in fact exist, there are a couple of problems here. The first is that the only Bull Teal Bank around this era wasn't prominent at all, certainly not enough to spawn such a term. Second, and more importantly, is the fact that both Barings Bank and the Bull Teal Bank were founded well after bull and bear were already common stock market terms. So I really hope you enjoyed that video. Time for me to welcome back TunnelBear for another sponsor spot. Have you ever done some shopping or internet banking in a coffee shop with a random open Wi-Fi connection? Well, I hope not if you don't have TunnelBear. Download the TunnelBear VPN app, which is super easy, activate it, and you can browse securely. You get something called AES 256-bit encryption protecting you. Now, I didn't know much about this, so I did some reading about it. I stumbled onto Stack Exchange, and there was a dude who described it as this: 256-bit key cracking through exhaustive search is totally out of reach of mankind, which I thought quite well illustrated just how secure TunnelBear is. Breaking that down though, and you just realize how super impossible it is. It would take 50 supercomputers 3 times 10 to the power of 51 years in order to crack it. So yes, technically it is totally possible, it's just not really likely that the shady dude in the corner of the coffee shop is going to have the time or the computer power in order to do that. So TunnelBear, it's a VPN that you need for a more open and a more private internet. TunnelBear.com/brainfood, link in the description below, is the place to go for a free trial. Protect your internet browsing today, and thank you for watching.